There are moments in friendship that happen behind closed doors. Moments that don't make the history books or the album liner notes. Moments when two men who the world sees as legends are just two people trying to outrun something they can't name. This is one of those moments. A late night in Nashville, mid-1960s. A small apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place where rent is cheap and nobody asks questions. Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash are sitting at a kitchen table that's seen better days. There's an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts, 2 coffee cups, both gone cold hours ago, a guitar case leaning against the wall, covered in road dust and venue stickers. And between them, on the table, things that aren't coffee. This is the true story of what happened when two of country music's biggest stars shared an apartment between marriages, between tours, between versions of themselves they were trying to leave behind. This is the story of a friendship built on music and mutual respect that became something darker, something neither of them could control. This is about the love they had for each other, and the love they both had for chemicals, and the night Waylon Jennings realized that if they kept moving like this, one of them was going to die. Let me take you back. Not to the legends, not to the icons, to who they were before the world decided what their story meant. Waylon Jennings, born in Littlefield, Texas, 1937. Johnny Cash, born in Kingsland, Arkansas, 1932. Both from dirt. Both from poverty so deep it marked everything they touched. Both found music as the only way out. And both discovered that getting out didn't mean you left the hunger behind. It just changed what you were hungry for. By the mid-1960s, they were both making names for themselves in Nashville. Waylon was the Texas kid who refused to let Nashville smooth out his rough edges. Cash was the force of nature who'd already had massive hits and was fighting to stay relevant in a business that chewed people up and spit them out. They met through the circuit, the same studios, the same bars, the same late-night sessions where musicians gathered after the official work was done to play music that mattered. And they recognized something in each other. Not just talent, pain. The kind of pain that comes from surviving when you shouldn't have. Waylon carried the weight of Buddy Holly's death. The plane crash that killed his friend while Waylon stayed behind. The guilt that never quite went away. Cash carried his own ghosts. A childhood marked by poverty and loss, a brother who died young, a darkness that followed him no matter how bright the stage lights got. They became friends, real friends, the kind who understood each other without having to explain. And when Cash needed a place to stay between his first and second marriages, when he was trying to figure out who he was outside of being married to Vivian, Waylon said what friends say, "You can stay with me." They rented a small apartment in Nashville. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with linoleum that was peeling at the corners, a living room with furniture that came with the place, but it was theirs. A space where they could be themselves without cameras or expectations or the weight of being Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings. At first, it was good. They wrote together, late nights at that kitchen table, trading verses, building songs from scratch. Gone to Denver came out of one of those sessions. Waylon's melody, Cash's imagery. 2 men who understood loneliness putting it into music. They'd play for hours, stop to eat something that barely qualified as food, then play some more. It was the kind of creative partnership that should have been legendary. And it was. But it was also something else. Because alongside the music, there was the other thing, the chemicals. It started small. Amphetamines to stay awake during long recording sessions. To keep the energy up during tours that didn't give you time to sleep. In Nashville in the 1960s, pills weren't seen as a problem. They were seen as fuel, the cost of doing business. Everybody used something to keep moving. And Waylon and Cash, living together, normalized it for each other in ways that made it feel less dangerous than it was. Cash would come home from a session wired, talking fast, pacing the apartment like a caged animal. Waylon would be up too, writing lyrics on scraps of paper, chain smoking, his leg bouncing under the table. And they'd laugh, talk about music, about the industry, about the people who didn't understand what they were trying to do. And they'd take more pills, because sleep felt like wasting time, because stopping felt like giving up, because the momentum was everything, and the chemicals were what kept the momentum going. But momentum has a way of becoming something you can't control. What started as a tool became a routine. What started as occasional became constant. And what started as camaraderie became enabling. Because when you're both doing it, it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like brotherhood. Like two guys who understand each other in ways the rest of the world doesn't. Years later, someone would describe their relationship during that time. They said Cash and Waylon shared two things during those years: a love for music and a love for chemicals. That's the line that stuck, because it was true, and because it explained everything that came after. The ashtray on the kitchen table was never empty. The coffee pot was always on, making coffee nobody drank. The guitar case by the wall became a landmark, a reminder that this was supposed to be about music. But increasingly, it wasn't. Waylon started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Cash's hands would shake when he wasn't high. The way his eyes would go flat in the middle of a conversation, like he'd left his body and was watching from somewhere else. The way he'd disappear for days, then show up at the apartment looking like he'd aged a decade. And Waylon would want to say something, want to ask if Cash was okay. But he couldn't, because asking Cash if he was okay would mean admitting that Waylon wasn't okay either. And neither of them were ready for that conversation. Cash was chaos, always had been. He'd swing from manic energy to complete shutdown with no warning. One night, he'd be the funniest person in the room, telling stories that had everyone doubled over laughing. The next night, he'd be dark, distant, unreachable. Waylon would hear him pacing at 3 a.m., barefoot on the linoleum, pills rattling in his coat pocket. Sometimes Cash would forget lyrics to his own songs mid-sentence, his voice cracking like something was breaking inside him. Waylon learned to read the signs, learned when to engage and when to give Cash space, learned that trying to control Johnny Cash was like trying to control a storm. You just had to wait it out and hope the damage wasn't permanent. But Waylon was chaos too, just a different kind. Where Cash was a storm, Waylon was a pressure cooker. Controlled on the surface, but building towards something explosive underneath. He kept showing up, kept cutting records, kept playing shows, but the cost was getting higher. The $1,500 a day cocaine habit that would define his worst years was already starting. The paranoia was setting in, the sense that everyone was watching him, waiting for him to fail. And the pills and the powder were the only things that made the pressure bearable. One night, late, they were both at the kitchen table, wired, talking fast, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't that funny. Cash was telling a story about a show that had gone wrong, and Waylon was adding details, and for a moment it felt like the old days, like two friends making music and making sense of the world. But then the story ended, and the laughter died. And there was a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Cash looked at Waylon across the table. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were shaking. His face was thinner than it had been a month ago. And he said something that wasn't meant to be funny. "We're killing ourselves, man, slowly. And everybody's just watching." Waylon didn't answer right away, because he'd been wondering the same thing. But hearing Cash say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. They sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence where both people are thinking the same thing, but neither wants to be the first to say it. Finally, Waylon spoke. "What do you want to do about it?" Cash laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who knows the answer but doesn't like it. "I don't know, Waylon. I don't know." The apartment didn't last much longer after that night. Cash moved out eventually, got married to June Carter, started the long, painful process of getting clean that would define the rest of his life. And Waylon stayed in Nashville, kept touring, kept recording, kept living the outlaw image that was slowly destroying him. They stayed friends, stayed connected through music and mutual respect. But something had changed. The brotherhood that had felt unbreakable in that apartment had been tested by the truth neither of them wanted to face. That love, even deep love, can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is step back and let them hit bottom alone. Waylon's bottom came later. In 1977, when the DEA raided a Nashville studio and found cocaine that should have sent him to federal prison. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, when the debt climbed to $2.5 million and his health deteriorated so badly, people didn't think he'd survive. And finally, in April 1984, when he rented a place in Arizona and quit cold turkey, just stopped, because his son Shooter was watching him, because Jesse Coulter had stood by him through hell, but couldn't keep watching him die, because he'd run out of road and had to choose between living and letting the chemicals finish what they'd started. Cash hit his bottom in 1967, crawling into Nickajack Cave in Tennessee, overdosed and ready to die. He had a religious awakening in that cave, crawled back out, got clean, married June, rebuilt his life and his career. But he never forgot the apartment, never forgot the nights with Waylon when they were both running from the same thing and convinced themselves they were running together. Years later, someone asked Waylon about that time, about sharing the apartment with Cash, about what it was like when both of them were at their worst. And Waylon said something that explained everything. He said they had a love for music and a love for chemicals. And for a while, they couldn't tell the difference between the two. Waylon lived 18 years after he got sober. He kept making music, kept showing up, but he was different, quieter, more careful. He died in 2002, 64 years old, sober. Cash lived 36 years after getting clean. He became one of the most respected figures in American music. He died in 2003, 71 years old, just months after June died. But before all of that, before the sobriety and the redemption and the late career triumphs, there was that apartment, that kitchen table, that ashtray and those cold coffee cups, and that guitar case leaning against the wall. There were two men who loved music and loved each other and loved chemicals in ways that nearly destroyed them both. And there was a night when one of them finally said out loud what they'd both been thinking. We're killing ourselves, and everybody's watching.